The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association, connecting Virginians to their government. Please welcome Delegate Ken Plum. Good to see you, Ken.
Woody, good to be back with you.
You represent the 36th District, I believe, and you've been here about 35 years.
That's exactly right. 36th District is in the community of Reston, just a half dozen miles or so from Dulles Airport in Fairfax County. Represent also a couple precincts that are in Herndon, next to the town of Herndon, a couple precincts next to the town of Vienna. But that constitutes the 36th District. Center of the universe, some of the best people in the world.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit about your 35 years of experience here. How have things changed over time?
They changed dramatically, Woody. The introduction of technologies made a whole lot of difference in how we pass laws. In the old days, we had an electric voting machine. You actually flipped a switch to record your vote. It didn't, it lit up a light on the board, but it didn't have the digital features that we have now. That took a little while to do that, to get that voting done. We also went over every bill one by one. The full committees would hear the bills. Those that made it to the floor would all be discussed and debated on the floor in a much more elongated fashion than we do today. I can remember sessions on the floor 11, 12, and 1 o'clock at night. Now we have accelerated that with an uncontested calendar. The digital voting system is much quicker and hopefully more transparent. We continue to have the basic structure that Mr. Jefferson outlined in Jefferson's manual about how the bills come through the legislature. And of course, the whole subjects that we have to pass laws about now are more complicated. I just came from a meeting of the Technology and Science Committee, and we were looking at a bill related to digital signatures. You know, I guess when the General Assembly first met, it was talking about signing with quill pens, and now we're talking about digital signatures and all the implication that has. The other bill before us that day was today was the expansion of the Space Flight Authority
at Wallops Island.
At Wallops Island, because Virginia is a significant place for space travel. Wallops Island has a location that is ideal for a number of space shots, and we need to get into business because a lot of other states are doing that, and a lot of future efforts will be put forth there.
So has the subcommittee process been as important as it is now? I mean, when you first started, were there many subcommittees?
There were hardly any subcommittees. In fact, a subcommittee would occur only when there was a particular bill that required a lot of extra work. A subcommittee might be named at that point for that bill. The way it works now is everything goes to subcommittee, and subcommittees, if they don't act favorably on a bill, it doesn't go to the full committee, so it's essentially defeated. If it goes to subcommittee and comes out without a dissenting vote, it may not be explored very much in the full committee and might get to the floor pretty quickly. The result of that is that as a practical matter, what happens, and you know, I've been working on the matter of trying to work to end gun violence. What kind of common sense gun measures can we pass? I think, for example, that people who are known criminals, people who have violent behavior in their background, they're mentally ill, they're violently ill, shouldn't possess guns. That bill every year goes to a committee of 22, to a subcommittee of 5, to a vote of 4 to 1 against, and it's predictable. It just goes that way. I have some concerns about the continued reliance upon those on a subcommittee, because that means in that instance 4 people of the 140 members of the General Assembly have made a decision for the population. And I don't think that's in the best interest of the public. I think they're bills of such broad import that they ought to be considered by the full legislature. Another example I will give to you is the matter of redistricting our districts. The public has become aware, largely through the efforts of One Virginia 2021, an organization that works on behalf of redistricting measures. They have a little film out called Jury Rigged, looked at how Virginia is gerrymandered in its districts. And they maintain, and I agree with them, that legislators have a self-interest in how the districts are drawn. Our ability to be objective and draw districts based on factors other than saving our own seat in the legislature is difficult to overcome. But those bills this year again, and I have introduced a bill incidentally on this subject since 1982 to set up an independent redistricting commission. Those bills go to a subcommittee of the Privileged and Elections Committee, and this year were all lumped together along with some other bills, and in one fell motion, one swift motion, they were defeated. Now we'll all know soon the ultimate outcome of the bills because the Senate did pass some bills that would set up an independent redistricting commission. They'll go back to that same subcommittee, however, and now it's imperative upon the sponsors of those bills to make their views known and see if we can get the subcommittee to change its mind. Otherwise, again, we got a situation where, in that instance, maybe it's a dozen or so members who are making a decision for the 140 members. So I think we have, in our effort to be efficient, in our effort to finish early and get this job done and so on, we've gone to some expediencies that I don't think have been in the best interest of the process. So the number one that I would mention in that regard would be the full use of subcommittees. The other difference I've noticed, that particularly this year, in the old days there used to be a joke about the General Assembly wouldn't act on something, they'd send it to a study. And that was true, we had a lot of studies. And studies served a purpose because, we're part-time legislators. We come down here a couple months of the year to Richmond, otherwise we're back home. And our ability to deal with complex, evolving issues is limited by the knowledge that we bring to it ourselves and the short time we have to work on it. The studies in the past would allow us through the course of the year to bring in expert testimony and so on, and to work out the details of legislation. And from that effort then, I think we would sometimes come up with a better product. We continue to do that. However, this year, in a surprise move in the House Rules Committee, about 25 proposed studies were lumped together with no discussion, and in one fell motion were defeated. That, I think, sells the people short of their ability to have input to the legislative process. It sells us short in terms of being able to respond to every one of those resolutions, and certainly there were some in there that I would heartily opposed. I didn't think they were proper or whatever. But all of them have a constituency. They have a group of people who are interested in them. That's how they get introduced here.
Right.
And everybody should have their say in their day. Likewise, we shouldn't just deal with the simple subjects that we can deal with in a couple of months. We should deal with the complex subjects. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course. The Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission meets around the year, across the year. So does the Crime Commission, the Healthcare Commission. So there's some groups that are set up to do these long-term studies. But there's some things among those that fall through the cracks that wouldn't get full consideration if we didn't approve a study short-term.
Right. Now, those subcommittees don't have recorded votes, do they?
The answer is yes and no. If you go to a subcommittee of a full committee, you will find that the clerk has a piece of paper, and when the motion is made, the clerk, if it's a close vote, may have people hold up their hands or whatever, and they actually make a recording of that. That piece of paper doesn't go anyplace, however. And if you want to know what's on that piece of paper, you'd have to go to a Freedom of Information request, I guess.
See.
As opposed to a committee where the vote is actually recorded, printed in the calendar, and made known to everybody, as are votes on the floor. So the subcommittee thing, too, gets a lot of criticism from people because today, for example, Monday morning at 7 a.m., I went to a subcommittee meeting. I happen to know that a constituent of mine in Northern Virginia is very interested in two of the bills that were on that calendar. Now, if he had chosen to come to Richmond to speak, He'd have to be down here at 7 o'clock in the morning like I would have. And while I can certainly speak for him, it's much more persuasive if people who are involved in the field can offer their expert testimony to a bill. So sometimes, and when we have these subcommittee meetings, they're in small rooms because that's the accommodations we have. They're small. It seems that sometimes the discussion around the table is somewhat muted. It's kind of hard to hear what's going on. Particularly if you're in the back of the room and the room is full of people, it's kind of hard to know what's going on. And from that then, the vote might be taken, and if nobody asked for it to be recorded, it might have been a voice vote that you heard or you didn't hear, and you couldn't tell whether people were moving their lips or not, and you go home unawares of what the outcome is. We can do a better job of that than that. The notion of having the clerk turn that piece of paper in and have that vote, subcommittee vote, recorded as well is something that would be simple to do, particularly in this day and time. And now, in our full committees, we actually vote electronically, and that extending that to the subcommittee. But people need to, I think, leave here feeling that they've been heard. And there's some things like the scheduling of the subcommittee meetings, the failure to create those votes and so on and record them, I think make people sometimes realize that or make people think that the process is not open to them, that maybe things are decided in advance. Maybe there's an ideology that determines the outcome of all this, and they're not adequately heard. And I tend to agree with them, frankly, that there are things that we could do. So it wasn't necessarily any better the old days, except that maybe we didn't use as many subcommittees. We didn't have the electronic voting, so it was a little more cumbersome to how the vote count was kept. But in our effort to become efficient, we've, I think, left out some matters of transparency and openness that I think is unfortunate.
Now, one of the positive things that has occurred this year relate to the ability of a citizen now to watch a floor debate, either the House or the Senate, online on demand.
Right.
Heretofore, it had been live streamed, but if you missed that day, you were sort of out of luck.
Sure.
I guess the other rule change that occurred, last session related to the prohibition against having committee meetings on the House floor, ad hoc committee meetings.
Yeah, and that live streaming, I don't know why it's taken us so long to get there, but a lot of people said, well, gee, we can't do that because everybody will just grandstand and everybody will be making speeches for the folks back home. If there's any of that, it's not obvious to me that that's the case. When you stand up and speak on the floor, particularly if the bill is controversial, you're trying to bring to the attention of the legislative body your position on that issue, and which folks back home can then learn about and appreciate as well. So I don't think the supposed concern that some had about live streaming of sessions has really come about. Of course, when I speak, it's always something very important, and I'm not grandstanding at all, and every member who has something to say feels that way about what they're saying. The committee meetings on the floor had been an expediency that I don't know that it was especially abused, but from somebody outside looking in, it looked like things were being done behind the scenes. It mainly was like procedural matters and so on. I'm glad we've gotten rid of it, but I don't think it was greatly abused.
What about collegiality and partisanship over your 35 years?
Yeah, I came as a Democrat when the Democrats controlled the legislature. I'm now a senior Democrat in a Republican-controlled body. There were 75 of 100 members of the House Democrats when I arrived. There are only 35 of us now.
So it's basically flipped.
It's essentially flipped, yeah. And so that affects, obviously, your ability to communicate with the leadership, the committee chairs, and all that sort of thing. As a group, however, we're very collegial. We get along. I don't know of personal animosities and that sort of thing. When we come to vote, we're very different, and that kind of thing. I sometimes say to my fellow colleagues, you ought to be ashamed of yourself voting that way. But they would say to me, you should be ashamed of yourself voting that way. But it doesn't keep us from being friends. So I think we're collegial. We are very separate, though, in terms of where the ideology grows. Virginia legislature has always been conservative. It's especially conservative today. Our country seems to be especially conservative today. Not so much the Democrat and Republican, because it's a political spectrum, you know. And when you get on the right side of the spectrum, there's some people who get off on the Tea Party end of it. They're pretty fixed in their ways of doing things, and it's kind of hard to understand how to meet them halfway, because issues like abortion, women's rights to choose, all that sort of thing, they're so fixed in that there's hardly any discussion about it anymore. The bills continue to come. Now the bills pass, the governor vetoes them, so Virginia doesn't get necessarily the criticism some other states have gotten in recent years, because the governor's been able to veto the really far out bills. And House Bill 2 that got North Carolina in so much trouble, actually it passed in Virginia, but the governor vetoed it, so we didn't get the publicity about it. Never went into effect here. But if you ever had a situation, and heavens help us if this happens, where the legislature and the executive would both be controlled by the same party, that could lead to some really serious consequences for the Commonwealth, I think.
Now, I know sometime next month in your district you are sponsoring a civic engagement workshop.
Yeah, I am, Willie. And you know, this grows out of conversations I've had with just dozens of people these days who continue to ask me, what can I do? That's the question. What can I do? There are people who want to get involved because they don't like the direction the country is going in. They don't like how the last national election came out, and they don't like the tone of what's going on. And people, older people saying to me, I've never been involved, but I want to get involved, what can I do? And since that has come to me so often, I decided to set up a civic engagement workshop. The title of it is, What Can I Do? A civic engagement workshop. And what I've assembled are about 15 organizations that, the common ones that you know about, the League of Women Voters, and the American Association of University Women, and groups like that, One Virginia 2021, but lesser groups or other groups that include Virginia Interfaith Center, the Cornerstones for My Community, and so on. These are all groups where people are already involved in improving the life in a community. And they're all going to come and have a little booth, if you will, in a school gymnasium, and people are going to be able to come and shop, you know, look around and see what it is they want to be involved with. I've been astonished at the response I've gotten from people who say they're going to come. I'm starting to scratch my head to wonder if we should get a bigger space, but nonetheless, a whole lot of people are showing an interest. My response to people when they ask, what can I do, is first to say, you know, you need to kind of take a look at yourself and figure out what is of all this that's going on, what is of an interest to you. Obviously, key and central to a lot of it would be the outcome of elections. So you may decide to involve yourself in partisan politics. Some of what we talk about by way of issues, I say to people, you're not going to be able to get the issue resolved. You're going to have to get the legislature to change. Right. When the legislature changes, you get a different outcome. So for some people, becoming more involved than just voting, and gosh knows, you got to vote, and we have to make sure people do that, although they haven't necessarily regularly done that in Virginia. The drop-off in these off-year elections is pretty great. But get involved in the elections and in working in campaigns, that's part of it. And I will tell you, my civic engagement workshop has invited both parties to be there, because it's not about an outcome, it's about getting people involved. I'm convinced that my point of view in the end is going to win, because we're on the right side of things, right? At least that's my perspective. And I want to have people work on behalf of those outcomes. I have to tell people then what you need to do, I think, is inventory what's going on. A number of people have organized themselves now in new groups that are coming up with names and purposes and so on, without an awareness of the fact that there have been some people really working hard on these things for a long, long time. And my workshop will in fact be an inventory of those groups. It will be the major groups in my community that are dealing with these issues, that you can then get to know those people, who they are, how you join, and what kind of things you'd be involved with. So I'm feeling really good about how it's progressing in terms of people's interest, and it's open to everybody. There's no fee involved. Langston Hughes School is in the middle of my district, Langston Hughes Middle School. It's on March the 11th. That's a Saturday. Runs from 9:30 in the morning until noon. You can show up. There's not going to be any long speeches or anything like that. It's going to simply be an opportunity for you to shop among groups that are involved in our community, so that you can help determine then how you might want to get involved.
Now, you've also sponsored a number of electronic town halls from time to time,
Yeah.
where you have constituents call in, you answer questions. You also do a constituent survey every year.
Oh, yeah.
What are you hearing from your constituents?
I do all those things. I mean, I explain to people, when you call me a delegate, that means I've been delegated a
Right.
responsibility. And my responsibility is to represent my constituency. So I do surveys that are available on my website throughout the session, as well as in my electronic newsletter that I send out. And I send out an electronic newsletter every week. Every Wednesday at 6 a.m. it shows up in your mailbox, in your electronic mailbox, if you subscribe. I don't send it to people who haven't shown an interest in receiving it. But I've also used a system of phone surveys where I call up people and they can ask questions there. And I regularly have open hall meetings. The most recent one, I call them conversations. I was at a local coffee house, for example. I was at a local community room where I can have conversations with people ongoing. And those are generally the people who are already involved. What I'm looking to try to do is to capitalize on this great public interest that has arisen from where we are now, and try to help those people figure out a slot to get into to go forward. It says again too, I think, when we talk about our school programs, you know, we talk about STEM and STEAM and all those acronyms that relate to science and technology and math. No question about their importance in terms of our students getting vocational training and that sort of thing. But I also put social studies in there. I'm a former social studies teacher. And I think that part of the problem of what's happened in our country is that people have kind of forgotten their civic responsibility. They haven't understood how they work within the civic structure of the community. And so I love to see us involve our kids more in environmental issues, for example, how it is that we preserve the quality of life in our community. Some people say, well, I want more government regulations. And I say, I don't want government regulations either, but I want clean water and I want clean air. And you get those in some regulatory capacity. And in order to meet those regulation requirements, sometimes we just need plain old volunteers. So picking up trash, not pretty to do, very important, however. Reston's got some beautiful lakes, and we want to keep them that way, so we got to keep the trash out. So civic education for me is important. Today I'm working with adults saying, come to this workshop, and I'm not going to tell you how you need to think. You're going to figure that out for yourself. But if you want to know what is it that people do to explore issues in depth, to understand them, they need to know the League of Women Voters process. The League of Women Voters has been this for 100 years. They are very thorough. I use the League of Women Voter material myself for background information. American Association of University Women do the same sort of thing. There are lots of people in our community who are involved in groups now that are helping immigrants, for example, outreach to immigrants. There's an immigration forum where we get to know who these folks are, what their needs are, how they get here, and so we can live together as a community.
Let's talk a little bit about the budget, especially as that relates to our schools, pay raises for teachers, deputy sheriffs, and our state police.
Yeah, well, Woody, I think there's a great sigh of relief when we get a budget together, right? We add up all the numbers and the incoming versus the outgoing, it's balanced, we say, right? And we have to balance, and that's true. What continues to concern me about the budgetary process in Virginia is that we walk away with a balanced budget and not looking behind to realize what's left on the floor, what didn't we get around the funding. And public schools are a prime example of that, and I've been harping on this for years. We have, over the years, slowly but surely increased funding for education, but it has not kept pace with the growth in population of our kids. What started off to be a thought that schools would be funded 60% by the state and 40% by the locality slipped into being 50-50, and now, without us paying attention to it, has become 40-60. State puts in 40, the locality puts in 60. So some people may say, well, why is it that the schools are always complaining they don't have enough money? Well, we have been appropriating the money for them. They have not realized the state money. Local folks may say, why are my property tax going up? My property taxes are going up because the state's not giving you the money for the schools. The kids have to go to school. The parents demand a quality school. Something has to give. And what has to give is that Schools are strapped for money. Localities are pushing up to the limits on their property taxes, and the state's not giving any relief. We can't continue to turn our attention away from that, nor can we continue to say, oh, we increased funding for education. Yes, we did, but we cut it so severely in 2008 that these increases are just trying to get back up to where we were. And so I regularly admonish the legislature saying, don't go home bragging about you didn't raise taxes, because you really did raise taxes. You raised the property tax by your inaction on funding schools. So the good news on the budget this time is that we finally got around to putting some significant amount of monies into mental health. That's an issue too that languished for so long until a senator's son committed suicide after attacking him with a knife. That brought to our shocking attention that there's some people out there who are really sick who need help. Nobody's fault. It just happens. People get mentally ill. People get into desperate situations, and they need immediate response. For that senator's son, there was no bed available. There was no place to take him. And that's been true in communities around the state. Our local community of Northern Virginia, Fairfax, has put a lot of money into mental health because we are a larger state and we have some more larger community and we have a larger amount of money to put in. But around the state there haven't been some services in some localities at all. People have had to travel far distances to get that. That's not fair to families. These things happen to families through no fault of their own. Good news is we're putting some more money in. You're going to have adequate treatment and so on. And the good news, what happens with that is we won't be taking mentally ill people to jail. That's been the fallback. 20 to 30% of the population of a given jail in a given community turns out to be people who are mentally ill. Yeah, they acted out. Yeah, they had to pick them up off the street, but it wasn't because they were criminal-minded. It's because they were ill. So these added services will help us break down that effort. The good news also is that we're taking a look at the fact that the way schools conduct discipline is also a concern. Too much discipline has been that when the child acts out, we take them out of the classroom. We send them home, suspend them, or ultimately expel them, when in fact the child acting out says, I need help, I need help. And if you send them home and they still don't get any help, there's a good possibility they're going to end up in the criminal justice system. They're going to end up needing to jail, and that's bad.
Thank you for being here, Delegate Ken Plum. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Woody. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.
Mm-hmm.